to eat beans. My proposal is," I went on, "that before I unload any of my knowledge upon you, I glean some of what you already know. Thus I can spare you repetitions. And anyone who has anything particularly interesting to say about Egypt, let him or her hold up a hand." Now was the crucial moment. If no hand went up, I was lost. But hardly were the words out of my mouth when there was a waving as if in a wind-swept wheatfield place aux dames. I called upon Miss Hassett Bean to begin. She rustled silkily up, bowing to me, then directing an acetylene glare upon Colonel Corkran's end of the room. She was, I foresaw, about to kill two birds with one stone, to say nothing of the marmoset, who fell off her arm into General Harlow's coffee and created a brief diversion. As soon, however, as the monkey was rescued and before General Harlow's shirt front was dried, the lady began to speak. "We all thank Lord Ernest," she said, looking from the Colonel to the Reverend Wyman Watts, and back again, "for sparing us one of those commonplace inflictions from which we've all nightly suffered on board this yacht. If we didn't know already, such school-book facts as Christianity being introduced to Egypt by St. Mark in Nero's time, and that Moses and Plato both studying philosophy at Heliopolis, and things like that, we wouldn't be spending our money with Sir Marcus A. Lark to see Egypt. Never before have we been encouraged to air our views. Those of us with political opinions have been snubbed, and we who are interested in women's suffrage have been assured that we will find nothing to please us in the land of veiled women. At last I am given a chance to state without being interrupted that Egypt was once the most enlightened country in her treatment of women. Long before the time of the Greeks, and even before the shepherd kings, Mr. Watts has told us so much about, using his Old Testament as if it were a Baedeker, the women of ancient Egypt had rights according to their class. Queens and princesses were considered equal with their husbands. Women were great musicians, playing upon many instruments, especially the sistrum, sacred to the goddess Hathor. And weren't all the best gods goddesses, when you come to think of it? Women used to drive their own chariots, as we do our motors, and hold salons like the French ladies. There was Rhodopis, for instance, who married the brother of Sappho. I wonder if Colonel Corkran could have told you the story of Cinderella comes from an anecdote of Rhodopis? I hardly think he's been able to spare enough time from bridge to study Strabo, who was the Baedeker of Egypt for tourists 600 years before Christ. An eagle saw Rhodopis bathing, and stealing one of her sandals flew with it to Memphis, where he dropped it into the king's lap. It was so small and dainty that King Hophra scoured Egypt for the owner, and when he found her at last, according to Strabo, made her his queen. If Strabo was right, she lived long before Sappho's day, interpolated the Colonel's voice. Of course Strabo was right. There were two of Rhodopis. Everybody knows that. The third pyramid was built for the tomb of the first one, not for King Mycerinus, I believe. Why shouldn't a woman have a pyramid to herself? The Sphinx is a woman, as I will insist to my dying day if it were my last word. I hope Lord Ernest won't ram down our throats any nonsense about that noble and graceful tribute to the mystery of womanhood being a stupid King Harmachis, or Haramku. I wouldn't believe it if I found 100 nasty stone beards lying buried in the sand under her chin, instead of one, which could easily have been put there to deceive people. Probably King Haramchis had the Sphinx altered to look like him. No wonder she shuddered at such profanation, and shed her false beard. There you have my theory. And as for Egypt being now the land of veiled women, where suffragettes find no sympathy, I've heard that the Prophet's order for veiling has been purposely misconstrued by tyrannical men with their usual jealousy. Even Mohammed himself was jealous. With this Miss Hassett Bean sat down, amid fitful applause, and at my earnest request Miss Enid Biddle, the prettier twin, stood bravely up. She wished, before the subject was changed, to tell some little things she had read about the girls of ancient Egypt, how like they were to girls of today, in all their ways, especially in things concerning love. It was they who first questioned the petals of flowers for their lovers' loyalty. How much they thought about their clothes, too, getting their best things from foreign countries, as women did now from Paris. It was so funny to read how the girls of old Egypt had consulted palmists and fortune-tellers and astrologers just as girls did in Bond Street now, and that what billikens and swastikas and birthstones were to us, images of gods were to the girls of Egypt who lived before the days of Moses. They had scarab rings with magic inscriptions, and sacred asps for the symbol of intelligence, and lucky eyes of Horus wounded by the wicked god Set, and cured by the love of Isis. On their bracelets and necklaces they hung charms, and their dressing tables were covered with images of favourite gods and goddesses. Hathor, the goddess of love and joy, was supposed to give her choicest gifts to girls who wore her special colour, that green-blue in the temple of Edfu which Robert Hichens calls the colour of love, and to those who had her pet stones, emeralds or turquoises. Nowadays in Egypt the jewels of the women were only lent to them by their men, and could be taken away as punishment, or be pawned or sold in case of need, but in old days Egyptian women had all their most beautiful possessions buried with them. When her sister had finished, I urged the other twin to speak, and timidly Miss Elaine repeated to us what a friend of hers, a clergyman (here a blush), had told her: that the Red Sea was not red, but a brighter blue than any sea in the world, and called red only because it washed the red lands. Her friend had written down for her in verse such a sweet legend concerning the Nile rising every spring from a single tear shed by Isis, a much more powerful goddess than Hathor, because she was the goddess of goodness as well as love. And the Nile used to be named Sihor by the Egyptians, and the year separated into 3 seasons: flood time, seed time, and harvest. Miss Biddle's friend was writing a book about Egypt, and was going to divide it in 3 parts like that. It was to be dedicated to her. Bless the dear creatures, how they kept the ball rolling to please themselves, and indirectly to sort out my stock of ideas! Harry Snell, the newspaper man, was not hard to persuade to his feet. He was studying the resemblance between Arabic and English words. He had found out, among other things, that tally-ho was tally-hoon, brought home by the Crusaders. He even had a theory that some of our words came from the early Egyptian. Amen, for instance, he believed to be derived from Amun, the name of the great god, father of all the other gods of Egypt, which was cried aloud, he understood, in the temples during religious services. The parson jumped eagerly up to dispute this theory, and happily forgetful of me, seized the opportunity to spring upon us a few facts from his own store. When, however, Mr. Watts's discourse got him as far as Joseph's well in the citadel, General Harlow could bear no more, but sprang up to inform us that the Joseph of the well in the citadel was quite another Joseph, some Yusuf of the Arab conquerors. The General knew all about that, because his son was stationed in the citadel, and he proceeded to meander on historically, over a period between the first Arab conqueror, Amru, to Haroun al-Rashid, assuring us that old Cairo was the city of the Arabian Nights. He would, to my joy, have gone on indefinitely from Saladin to Napoleon, if Sir John Biddle, as the only baronet on board, had not cut the only general short. He is a square man whose portrait could be properly done only by a cubist. "Too much history, my friend," he shouted, getting up with the manner of one accustomed to making dinner-table speeches. "What most of us are coming to Egypt for is mummies. Egyptian history is too troublesome, anyhow, for a normal man to grasp. Give me mummies! There's something in them. Why, even if you can get a king or queen fixed in your head, somebody who's paid to make you know things don't know," an eye shot for Corcoran, comes along and swears they didn't exist. Now there's Mina. I'd have pinned him like a stuck butterfly. I could remember that he was the first known king, and founded Memphis, and lived 6,000 years before Christ, all because we're going to stay at Mina House, which is named after him. I don't know why I remembered him that way, but I did. Just as I could recall the Queen with a name like a sneeze by thinking of her as Queen Hattenshoes. Now Colonel Corcoran informs us that we must pronounce her in a different way. And what's the consequence to me? I've ceased to try and keep track of her. King Mina is, too, lost to me forever, through the over-conscientiousness of our late conductor, who says there never was a Mina, only several kings they've mixed into one. I seem to be the one who's most mixed up. To whet my appetite for Egypt now, I have to have something tasty. Where's the good of stuffing my mind up with a string of names which I couldn't mention to anyone at home, because I can't pronounce them? The word dynasty, he pronounced it dynasty, makes me sick. Luckily I feel that nobody else will know any more than I do. I'm coming to Egypt for a rest cure, because I don't have to learn its history. But some lecturers won't let me have a minute's peace. A king named Sneferu couldn't expect to appeal to a man like me, even if he did build the oldest pyramid, and even if you could show me his mummy, which you can't. But I draw the line at kings without mummies. I don't want to know them. Now, my wife is against mummies on show.